the UCL, University of Sheffield, Centre for Food Policy at City in the University of London, the Food Foundation, the University of Aberdeen, the Royal Vet College, the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, or ATRI, in India, and the Centre for Chronic Disease Control in India. I hope I haven't left anyone out, but the point is it's this kind of large consortium. And the focus that we've been working on is trying to bridge this gap between science and practice to understand and solve environmental problems. And specifically, we've been trying to build understanding of the links between environment, food systems, and health. I think there's been a ton of work that's been done looking at parts of this system, for example, the influence of food systems on health, or the impact of environmental change on food systems, but not enough work, we think, has been done on the interactions across the whole system, linking the environment with food and health. So that's what we've been trying to do for the last few years. And we'll show you some of the progress we've made, but also point to clearly there's a lot more to be done. So enough from me. I mean, the plan is that we've split the webinar into 3 segments, one for each of the countries. We'll begin with India, then South Africa and the UK. Each will begin with a short 10 minutes or so presentation that tries to synthesize kind of policy recommendations within that country. But then we want to open it out to questions, to comments. We've got some panel members who can try and answer and run that discussion. So that's the game plan. I hope I haven't missed anything, and I will hand over to Malika for the India section.
Thank you, Richard. I hope my screen is visible. Can someone please give me a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Right. So good afternoon, good day, and welcome everyone to this India section of the Sustainable and Healthy Food Systems report. I'm Malika Sardeshpande, a postdoc at ATRI and UKZN, which are partners in the consortium. And we have panelists today, including Dr. Suhas Wani, who is currently an independent consultant, but has in the past worked with the Asian Development Bank and ICRISAT, and Dr. Ashok Kumar Are, who is the regional director for the program for Asia at ICRISAT, which is the Research Institute for Crops in Semi-Arid and Tropical Regions. So as Richard introduced to us, the SHEFS consortium has a number of partners across India, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. And they have been doing research at their own institutes, but also collaborating together over the past 5 years. And during this process, we have been consulting with researchers across the spectrum, but also with policymakers and practitioners to find out what our research can be applied to and what the main concerns today are for policymakers and the world in general. So based on this process, we've come up with 2 questions. The first one being about societal change and the second being about environmental change. So across India, there's a lot of rapid urbanization happening, and the burning question seems to be, how do you ensure equitable and nutritious food systems for all in the face of this urbanization? And in terms of the environment, we're all aware that there's lots of drastic change happening. So how do we make our food systems across India resilient to this change? So I will be presenting 5 insights based on the research that we have done at SHEFS. The first 2 are related to societal change, and the next 3 are related to environmental change, and then 5 policy actions to speak to high-level policy changes that we can make to achieve sustainable and healthy food systems. So the first insight that we found was that access to nutritious and healthy diets is different across the socioeconomic gradient. Initially, I mean, the main finding is that people aren't consuming enough nutritious fresh fruits and vegetables. Part of this is because they can't afford it, and part of it is because markets haven't penetrated sufficiently to rural areas, especially places where the scheduled tribes and scheduled castes live. So this all leads to lower nutritious food for these people. And alongside these sections of society, we also have women, not only in rural areas, but also in urbanizing towns and low-income households that tend to skip meals to ensure that there's sufficient food for the rest of the household. And this makes them especially vulnerable to undernutrition and related diseases. Our second insight is that urbanization itself is changing how people view diets and the choices they make in the food that they consume. So where people can afford it, they are moving rapidly to processed and ultra-processed foods, which has very clear negative health outcomes. And even in rural areas and where agriculture is modernizing and due to technology and market integration, people aspire to eat processed foods and purchased foods rather than their traditional home-cooked meals. Also, as cities expand and engulf agricultural land, or as people move away from agriculture to urban areas, they are less likely to grow their own food and eat fresh food and prefer market purchased food, either because of their economics or because of their time preference. So all this has effects on society in terms of health and nutrition. And when it comes to the environment, some of the studies that we've done are modeling studies and some are in-field studies. So modeling studies found that, as we all know, the water availability and climate risks across India vary. It isn't uniform. So if we were to diversify the kind of crops that we are currently planting, based on our information of how much water is available in the water table, what the seasonal variations are, and so on, then we could probably be able to plant more regionally appropriate crops. As you can see in the figure to the right, we have a lot of dependence on wheat and rice, particularly for the public distribution system, the PDS, and this guzzles a lot of water. So if we were to switch to grains like sorghum, millet, and maize, which are consumed but not nearly at scale with wheat and rice, we could improve our water use efficiency for the whole crop portfolio. Some of our in-field studies found that regenerative agriculture is beneficial for the soil and for the biodiversity within the soil, but not only is it conserving the environment it is in, the yield from these regenerative agricultural plots are not compromised, as is the common misconception. So in terms of having outcomes for the environment, we also found that nudging consumer behavior to reduce food wastage and environmental risk from food can also play quite an important role. So people argue that pulling people out of food poverty is bound to have high environmental footprints. But a study from the SHEFS research found that this is only a slight 3 to 5% increase in environmental footprints. And as a matter of fact, if people that consume above the recommended intake, dietary intake by the National Institute of Nutrition, or people that waste food are convinced to reduce their food wastage and consume only as much as is necessary, we're likely to have a significant reduction in environmental footprints. So creating awareness about food footprints and reducing food wastage can really take the pressure off of production if we can educate consumers. When it comes to safety, I would refer to livestock, poultry, and cattle, for example, that include the use of a lot of antibiotics and chemicals that not only affect the safety of the food itself, but the environment around them. So educating farmers and consumers about the safety of their food and these antibiotics and what impact they can have in the environment can help drive consumers to demand more food safety, better food safety, and in turn, environmental safety. And our final insight is non-farm systems can also produce nutritious foods for people. So for example, there are forest-dwelling communities in Karnataka and the Northeast, or agroecological communities that have quite a give and take interaction with their surroundings. So they derive nutritious things like honey and mushrooms and herbs from their environment and propagate it on their agroecological systems. So if you were to completely restrict these people from continuing with this sort of propagation of biodiversity, it also hampers biodiversity conservation and restricts people from accessing nutritious foods from their environment. So there is this valuable exchange of food and biodiversity that our research has located, and there'll be more about policy related to that. Not only this, cities also can provide a valuable habitat for pollinators. So if you were to encourage people living in cities to grow fruits and vegetables, they can hold valuable habitat for bees and other pollinators and also produce food for human beings. So based on these insights, we propose 5 policy actions. The first is the study by Brown and colleagues that is displayed here found that there isn't enough explicit linkages between environmental sustainability and food policy. And this is from the Green Revolution paradigm where production was the main focus. However, if we can integrate more impact deliverables, then we're likely to have more linkages between sustainability and nutrition in food systems. Now, the government of India runs a number of commendable programs such as the ASHA, the Anganwadi, Poshan Abhiyan, and the ICTS that are geared towards improving nutrition outcomes for women and children in particular. So we propose that these food and nutrition schemes should incorporate a certain amount of fresh fruit and vegetable to make it more accessible to those that cannot afford it, to improve people's exposure to the fact that these are essential parts of their diet. Nutrition education to also educate people about, moving away from traditional diets can have an impact, and therefore, how can you compensate for the lack of these nutrients is something that can be mainstreamed through these initiatives as well. And similarly, awareness related, education related to food footprints, food safety and wastage can also be channeled through these programs of the Government of India. Now, we have said a lot about how regenerative agriculture and diverse crop portfolios can really help us reduce our dependence on irrigation, for example, and unsustainable agriculture. But to do this, we also need to incentivize farmers and train them and enable them. So part of it is training them to diversify the grains and other fruit and vegetable that they produce, providing them with market linkages, but also providing them with infrastructure, for example, biodigesters and on-farm manure and things like that. So the government, again, has small fledgling programs and schemes that are coming up under the National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture. We suggest that their coverage be expanded and farmers be educated about the options they have to shift towards sustainable agriculture. And creating awareness of this sustainable agriculture among consumers, we hope, will also influence market demand for safe, sustainable, and healthy foods. Now, a lot of us are aware of the fact that groundwater is an issue in India, and we have water and electricity subsidies across the country, which is allowing people to draw water unsustainably for agriculture. And rethinking these incentives and diversifying your minimum support prices to include a better portfolio of grains and region appropriate crops will likely enable farmers to actually take up these environmentally friendly practices, sustainable practices. And lastly, encouraging city residents, for example, to grow pollinator-friendly foods and coupling forest rights with monitoring for sustainable extraction rather than completely barring people from extraction are some of our recommendations for policy. With that, I'd like to close and invite our panelists to make comments, and of course, our audience too, to put in their comments in the text box. And here are some suggested questions, but we can definitely have others. Thank you. Dr. Ashok, Dr. Suhas, I think I will continue to share my screen so we can refer to the questions and take it from there. But would you have any comments to begin with?
Yeah, if I can start with.
Sure.
In the labeling, one of the aspects people are talking about is if you label the food produced from either from regenerative agriculture or related things, it will lead to better food and sustainable systems and all. But the thing is, there aren't any mechanisms to establish traceability or any guaranteed certification. So how come the policies can address this kind of phenomena?
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Would
Malika?
anyone? Yes, Dr. Suhas.
I think let me come first on your third understanding, that is trade-offs and innovations can help balance environmental research and food nutrition. In this case, basically we need to understand that the country has moved from ship to mouth in 1966 to surplus food production, that is 316 million tons during 21-22. And the emphasis which was put by the government, as you rightly indicated, at that time, it was the food security first. So production-oriented approach was adopted. New genotypes responsive to the fertilizers and water application benefited the farmers. And the government policy of minimum support price was found convenient for every farmer to grow rice and wheat irrespective of the agroecological region. And that's why in Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, where they are not suitable for rice, we puddle them artificially and then produce the rice because MSP is there. So the solution basically what has to be there, that the policy has to come up to provide the farmers with no option rather than produce for agroecological region potential based production, which will take care of the soil as well as the rains and the water availability in that particular region. And it's a difficult thing. No politician would like to do that because of the lobbies around there. But at the same time, the market forces have the ability to change the farmers' decisions. And that's why our proposition is that it should be market-led diversification, taking into account the agricultural eco-subregion potential, so that it takes automatically, if the farmers are not able to sustain the production, they will not go next year for that particular crop. And only those who can produce the crop which is market required, for which farmers need the information about the market demand, the prices they get, and that is the one main thing which basically farmers as well as the policymakers have to see. Although you said in one of your actions that we need to educate the farmers as well as the consumers about reducing the wastage and all that, but you know that in India, only 12% of the farmers get the extension support from the government machinery.
Oh.
Yeah, and 51% farmers do not get any support for extension services. Out of 49%, 12% is government, and remaining one comes from the private companies and NGOs and others. So there is a need to adopt the holistic knowledge delivery system or holistic extension system for the farmers, because as you rightly said that allied sector activities also need to be promoted. The farmers get only 30% of their income from the crop production. The remaining 30% or 35% comes from the allied sector activities, like basically the livestock, poultry, piggery, and honeybee keeping, vermicomposting, etc. And remaining 30% comes from the service sector, that is the labor and etc. what they work on others field. In such a scenario, farmer within that 30% of the income of the crop grows number of crops starting from dry land to the irrigated flowers and vegetables and fruits and number of cereals and so on and so forth. So what we need is extension system which provides holistic solutions to the farmers, one-stop solutions. Farmer cannot go to 20 different applications to find the solution for his 20 problems. There has to be a one-stop solution, and that is what farmers need. And that's why the adoption of the technologies is low, because we give them the compartmental solutions. One of your recommendations that enhance the collaboration and cooperation amongst the government departments and other things, that is at a higher level. But we need to start from the lower level actually, where the extension support system, animal husbandry does it separately, horticulture department does it separately, agriculture does it separately, poultry does it separately. Farmer doesn't have time to talk with 5 different individuals coming to his house for 5 different problems. And that is where we need to start a collective action, like through convergence, and by adopting the consortium approach, by building the partnerships. We need the public-private partnership, as well as the partnerships with the farmers, partnership with the researchers, extension workers, and amongst the research institute also, the different departments have to talk with each other. Otherwise, you know that the pathologists work separately, entomologists work separately, agronomists work separately, breeder work separately, soil scientists work separately, and then everyone gives the compartmental solution. That should not be the case if we have to do this one. That is what I would like to interject at this time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wani. And this is really helping us take things forward, because we're talking about government departments and we are talking about schemes that have been rolled out to farmers. But like you said, they're probably not being taken up because they're so scattered and compartmentalized. So it really helps us to know that this could be a way forward, is to integrate all of these solutions and schemes into one place where the farmer can approach them. So thank you for that. Dr. Are, I just wanted to come back. So you were saying with nudging consumer behavior, you're saying the traceability and labeling might not necessarily be sort of verified, because I mean, the processes can be long drawn and taxing and expensive for farmers. Is that the case? Okay, so I've made note of that. I don't have anything that's immediately coming up to mind. But I just thought quickly to discuss, I mean, I don't see that anyone has any comments yet, and I see we still have a couple of minutes. So the government recently, the government of Punjab, the state government, I believe, rolled out a minimum support price scheme for moong, which I thought was quite interesting. So in between your rice and wheat, they incentivized farmers to grow moong, and then they would guarantee to buy back this crop because it fixed nitrogen in the soil. And I thought that was quite a bold move for a government to make, to break away from the regular crop system and incentivize farmers to try something new that helps their farms. Do you have any comments on that, perhaps?
Yeah, Mallika, I would say that this is not the first time that government of Punjab has done something like this, because the MSP is fixed by the central government, and central government fixes the MSP for not only for rice and wheat, but for number of crops. And the best example I would give you is the pigeon pea. 3 years back, when India was importing pigeon pea, every farmer went ahead and planted the pigeon pea. And we knew that at that time, the pigeon pea production is going to be very heavy and the market will collapse. And after that, 3 years, then farmers will not touch the pigeon pea because the prices would have gone down. So we talked with the government of India very quickly, as soon as the areas were planted under pigeon pea. We told to the Ministry of Agriculture that if the minimum support price is not declared very quickly, and assured the farmers that they will buy the pigeon pea production for next 3 years will be adversely affected, and then we'll have to continue to import. And that's what government, particularly this present government, responded very quickly, declared the pigeon pea support price, and covered almost something like 100 lakh tons pigeon pea was procured by the government of India. And that's where basically the quick response from the government in terms of policy support helped the farmers. And as a result, as you know now, India is self-sufficient in the pulses production for last 4 years, which earlier we used to import almost 5 to 6 million tons of pulses from Australia, Canada, Thailand, Africa, and so on and so forth, whether it is pigeon pea, chickpea, or other legumes as such. So the policy support of minimum support price is there for all the crops almost, but except vegetables and fruits. But we need to ensure that there is a sufficient market, and government cannot buy everything, because at the moment government has 3 years buffer stock for rice and wheat as compared to 1 year, which is mandatory for the government of India's policy. But we have 3 years because there is excess production, and you know that there are groups, pressure groups, which work on this, and that's where rice and wheat has become the problem for the country like India now.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
Malika, can I just come in here? One small thing. Of course, in the very first slide, you showed, how nutritional or food insecurity among the social groups, how it is actually affecting. I'm not an economist, or my knowledge in these kind of things is very less. I'm a plant breeder actually, but I started reading these things and I developed a lot of interest among the things what you are working. So I always think that, take a country like India. If you see what is the poverty level in India today, it's somewhere around 10%, just 10%. In urban, it is just 6%. But if you see the malnutrition in India, it's maybe 40 or 50 or even more.
34.
See, that means people are not poor, but malnourished. So there is a huge need for education of the people, consumers. I think fundamentally, that is the first step actually. If we can educate people, have a healthy choice in your diet, that takes care of many of these things. Automatically markets work, these kind of, sustainability, labeling, everything actually works the moment we educate the consumers.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you
Malika, I
very
would say at this point that the urban areas, the people with increasing incomes, their food choices are changing from vegetarian diet to non-vegetarian diet. And as per the estimate, we know that currently there are 40% people who are non-vegetarian in India, but by 2050, vegetarian people will be only 40% and 60% people will be non-vegetarian. And as you know that the footprint of water for non-vegetarian diet, it is 4,500 liters per day per capita. Whereas for non-vegetarian diet, it is 15,000 liters, 3 times than the vegetarian diet. So if all the world transforms to the vegetarian diet, there is no scarcity of water for food production. As you know, 80% of water uptake is for the food production, or water consumption is for food production. So secondly, we need to adopt the integrated water resource management approach. Basically, when we talk about water scarcity, we talk about the blue water scarcity, that is the irrigation water. We never consider the soil water, that is the green water, what we say, which contributes 66% of the water uptake for the food production. And this management of soil moisture for efficient use of soil moisture is a key, and which has been neglected by the policymakers as well as by the farmers, because it is always easy. You give me the borewell, you give me the canal, you give me the farm pond, I am happy about it. But we never use the soil moisture more efficiently, for which again, you need a integrated approach of balanced soil nutrition, water responsive genotypes, that those are more water use efficient, as well as also the appropriate plant protection measures for ensuring that whatever is produced is protected, and a value chain. Because
Yes.
as you know, that 25% of the food produced in India is wasted, either at the production side or at the processing side or as the consumer's end. And that's where basically we need to have the complete value chain approach, appropriate storage facilities for cold storage and other things, avoid the damage to the cereal foods like or legumes by the insects, pests, and rodents, etc. And then we need to enhance the awareness amongst the consumers to minimize the food wastage, as it happens in the country like Thailand in the hotel, or in the Western countries in Europe, that if you waste, you will have to pay for that. Even if you have paid for the dish, you cannot afford to leave it in the dish unused food. And that's where basically the awareness has to come in amongst the consumers also.
Thank you very much, panelists, Dr. Wani and Dr. Ashok Morare. I will, in the interest of time, now hand over to Rashida, who will do the South African bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We enjoyed your talk and your answers. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Hi again, everyone, and I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panelists on the previous discussion. It was very interesting, and there are so many things that came up that are actually very much aligned to what the South African outcomes are, and some some interesting points which I think we'll get into the discussion at the end of the session where we compare the different countries. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm Dr. Rashida Davids. I'm a researcher on SHEFS, focused on environmental sustainability on the program, and I'm also the research program manager from UKZN side. And I welcome the two panelists who have agreed to be here today. I'm not sure if Mr. Montle Mbele is here, but I see Mr. Takeldo is here from the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, and Mr. Montle from the Department of Social Development in South Africa. I'm so happy to have them here today. So the past 5 years of SHEFS research focus on South Africa was obviously aligned to investigate the links between the food system, the environment, and health within the context of South Africa. And to date, we've published 42 peer-reviewed papers on the South African context, and all of them are linked in one way or another to multiple sustainable development goals, which is essentially what the aim of SHEFS is to enhance well-being and human outcomes through enhanced food systems. And so because of the context of South Africa with our legacy of apartheid, our questions were, the research was basically framed around these two critical questions. The first one being, what are the important considerations and potential pathways for sustainably increasing access to equitable food production and nutrition security to the benefit of previously underprivileged South African communities? And the second one was, where can resource use be improved to enhance food productivity, distribution, and consumption without driving resource scarcity? So the research in the synthesis report has now been framed around 5 key priority areas that were identified as areas where government are basically seeking solutions for to address all the challenges that we are facing in South Africa. The first one being systemic inequalities. We have poverty alleviation, enhanced health outcomes, environmental sustainability, and enhanced governance. So the outcome or the synthesis report for SHEFS South Africa frames the research in terms of the status quo for these 5 priority areas, the gaps or challenges that we are facing, and also provides a host of solutions to address those challenges. And ultimately, we are producing policy briefs that will speak to these challenges and offer solutions to policymakers. So designing policies for improving healthy, sustainable, and equitable food systems requires understanding of how food, health, and the environment are interconnected. And this is exactly why we as SHEFS we have taken a systems approach to our research from the beginning of the project to really understand what does a sustainable and healthy food system look like for crop production and for livestock production, and how can we facilitate that through our research. And now at this point in the project where we are 5 years down the line and we are almost concluding the project, we've also then crafted the outcomes of our research into systems maps. And the systems map that I'm showing you here is for environmental sustainability, and the black text is essentially the status quo of environmental sustainability in South Africa. The challenges are in blue, and then the solutions that the research of SHEFS is offering. And for each of these 5 themes, we made the linkages to the bottom right there on what sustainable development goals are being addressed. So all of that is outlined in more detail in the synthesis report. And we've done the same for each of the other 4 categories of government priority areas in South Africa, the status quo, gaps and challenges, and potential solutions. So I'm just going to go through each of them individually and just touch on them. And of course, because there's 5 years of research and a lot of papers still under production, some are under review at the moment, there's no way that we can present everything in one presentation. But I'll do my best to just give you like snippets of what we have found through our SHEFS research in South Africa. We know that there are huge systemic inequalities as a legacy of our past in South Africa. We are one of the most unequal countries in the world. We have they've coined the term the food security paradox, because there are people who have high food insecurity, but they are living within high suitability agricultural areas. And so all of these inequalities that we face from the past, and obviously what we are living through now, have resulted in food and nutritional insecurity, with 43% of our population moderately food insecure. And this has had effects on physical and mental health. There's a number of challenges related to this. We have in our more challenged socioeconomic groups, we have major incidents, significant undernutrition of children, wasting and stunting, and we also have overnutrition with obesity. So it's like this dichotomy that we have to deal with, and that we are challenged with. And so the research came up with many solutions, but really what we need is place-based policy interventions that target communities vulnerable to food and health insecurity. So quite a few outputs of the research, and these different papers that obviously we present in the synthesis report that show geographically and spatially where the areas are that are needing the most urgent attention in terms of policy to address these inequalities. There's a call for effective public health planning and interventions to address under and overnutrition, and we need policies that can facilitate structural change of the livestock-derived foods. And the research there found that small and medium-scale producers in livestock derived foods don't have equal access to markets, to information, to knowledge. So there's all of these issues that we have to deal with to try and improve equality going forward in South Africa. And the next theme is enhanced health outcomes. And for this one, we found the research found that access to nutritious foods and health outcomes are linked to socioeconomic status, of course, and then there are food choices that are an outcome shaped by migration. So there's a lot of rural to urban migration, obviously, because people are seeking to find work in urban areas. We have children that are suffering nutrition deficiencies, vitamin A, iron, and zinc, and again the hotspots of mental and physical health issues. And there's quite a few studies that have been done to identify and make the linkages between socioeconomic status and mental health issues in South Africa. And so that map on the right is just showing basically a food insecurity hotspot in KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape. And so this is just one example of where we are directing policymakers to implement interventions in specific geographical areas to address these 5 priority areas. So some of the solutions proposed here is to accelerate the development of biofortified crops to increase nutrient intake of specifically children, and to facilitate policies that enhance and support the production of indigenous crops, which have been shown to have multiple nutrition and livelihood outcomes and benefits, particularly for rural and poor households. Persistent poverty alleviation. So, I mentioned quite a few points already about the challenges we are facing socioeconomically in South Africa, but some of the solutions we have found is that there are opportunities to stimulate poverty reduction in rural areas, and research are proposing some of them, including the trade of indigenous crops and the trade in informal insects, because they not only provide increased nutrition, but they also provide socioeconomic opportunities. And then to support these smallholder farmers with agricultural development policies and inclusive livestock chains, and also with extension services. So environmental sustainability, we, as Sub-Saharan Africa, we know we are most vulnerable to climate change, and we're also a region with the least adaptive capacity. So we, an exclusive focus on food productivity has resulted in negative spillover effects on the environment. So we have an overemphasis on food security at the expense of water and energy. So a couple of solutions have been proposed through the SHEFS research, the one being to implement agricultural land use planning and management strategies to support civic ecology, which is the management of natural capital by local communities, because studies have shown that there's multiple socioeconomic benefits to those communities that manage natural resources. Policy interventions for the inclusion and promotion of indigenous foods, and then to use some of our research. For example, one was a water energy food nexus decision support tool that assists with the mapping of suitability areas for indigenous crops. And then finally, enhanced governance. So we've got 91 national level policies that cover 8 main domains that touch the food system: agriculture, environment, economic development, land and land reform, health, education, and social protection. And the research has found that there are many ministries, but that touch on food, health, and environment, but they function in silos with different priorities and different objectives. And so some of the solutions we are proposing is for policies to have a higher food goal, establish better coordination mechanisms, monitoring and evaluation to encourage learning for adaptive implementation, for food and nutrition outcomes in policies to be translated into tangible, practical plans and processes. And this actually came out of one of our previous engagements with policy actors, where they said, can you give us something tangible, give us maps and show us where we need to go? And that's exactly what we are trying to do now with SHEFS. And then to encourage holistic consideration of social ecological system and interplays between community, social, economic, and environmental aspects. So in a nutshell, that was the past 5 years of the SHEFS research. Yeah, I'd like to say thank you. I hope yeah, I hope that was, I didn't rush through that too fast, but it's quite tough to summarize 5 years of research into 10 minutes, and also with our research being multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary and cutting across so many disciplines and trying to make the linkages between them. I think it makes it all the more interesting, but at times it can also be a challenge to digest. So I think if you will allow me to go straight to our panelists, I see that Mr. Takeldo is on the call. Can I just ask if Mr. Mondle is here as well? He might be here under another name.
Hi, good afternoon, Rashida. I doubt it if Mondle will be available. I'm not sure if my camera is on. I've just switched it on for a while.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Yes, please forgive me, Rashida. I mean, I'm not in the country. I'm actually in Italy at the CFS.
Wow.
And my apologies at the Committee for World Food Security. So and that is why I joined a bit late, because we have a small issue in the bureau with the whole Russia-Ukraine
Okay.
conflict. So that is why I joined late. But I do know that today, currently, because it was actually our turn as agriculture to arrange the National Food and Nutrition Security Plan meeting. So Mondli might not be available because they are busy with the plan meeting. So so it even relates to this last slide that you had, the governance issue. We've already started on that one, in that we do have a National Food and Nutrition Security plan or core technical team from different departments, which includes health, social development, agriculture, COCTA, which is the cooperative governance ministry, as well as the traditional affairs, led by presidency, or Department of Planning and Monitoring and Evaluation. And they're currently having that meeting, which started this morning. Usually it's a full day meeting. And today I know they're on a farm because we've organized for them to go and visit the farm,
Oh,
because
wow.
most of these people don't know how farm life is. So we wanted to introduce them to agriculture and to really get that in. They're having the actual meeting on the farm. So he might not be here, but I'll try and represent him as far as possible, because we do work very closely. I think the research that you've shown is extremely valuable. And I think it has a lot of worth, because we actually needed, myself, Mondli, Rebone from Department of Health, we are policymakers, and so this is actually the research that's needed. I think we were struggling a bit because we do have a national food and nutrition security policy in the country, which was approved in 2014, but it wasn't as strong. And some of the nuances behind it, because Department of Health, who was part of food and nutrition of the policy, wanted to go on their own and they wanted to create a first 1,000 days of a
Okay.
child's life policy. And then the cabinet told them, no, guys, you are out of order. Cabinet brought them back into line and told them, we've approved the food security policy, go and become one with that. But the last 5 years has been difficult. So there's strategic objectives in that plan which needs to be met. And I think the first of strategic objective talks to governance, where we are trying to put down together a National Food and Nutrition Security Council. So the Deputy President has been appointed by the President to lead the council. And I think that would be our first step in terms of governance. And of course, organizations like yourself and the research that you've been doing for the last 5 years, and the different nexuses, food, energy, water, human capacity, all of those things is actually what's going to serve as a basis in that Food and Nutrition Security Council, led by the Deputy President, which needs to be a multi-stakeholder platform. And that is why the research that you've done has actually laid a good foundation. But if you listen to our Indian colleague, and to the Indian colleagues, there's very little I could add, and which because they said it all, and then here and there you localize it because it's South Africa. But there's so much in terms of food safety, because in South Africa we are really, and even now we are now, and as a country perspective, and a lot of people do differ with me. Luckily, as a government employee, and so the government is convinced of what I'm telling them, because you have food systems coming out now in South Africa. For us, food security is overarching. So you have food sovereignty, you have food systems, you have nutrition, all of these falling under food security, because we do believe that food security is not an output, but an outcome. And if you do the food safety, you do the proper production, you do the value chain things, you do the nutritional parts, food security will be attained. The only catch-22 situation or is the food sovereignty issue, but I think it's something that we are working on. What I can also add here, Rashida, is, it comes through your research as well, is we do have a way of working together, but we actually need to fixate it a bit more. We sort of slowly breaking down that silo mentality. We are building bridges between the different departments so far, between Department of Agriculture, Department of Social Development, Health, basic education. There's a good bridge between these. We have good linkages, and our departments work very well together. But I think much more can be done, as your research has shown. So yeah, I think we try to integrate programs as well, whereby Department of Agriculture filters into the school nutrition program, where we know that we have 9 million learners that is food insecure, and those get at least one good meal a day. We have had one success, that you had the health promotions levy, or better known in South Africa as a sugar tax. Yes, we have a sugar tax. We're taxing everybody, the Coca-Colas, the McDonald's, for the sugars. We do have, it's called the health promotions levy, but in layman's terms, sugar tax. We are trying to get through Department of Health, they're trying to push for a salt reduction in foods and in processed foods. There is good advocacy, and I think more needs to be done on the 7 colors. They call it the 7 colors that needs to be on your plate. In terms of production, I think subsistence farming, where more people get involved in agriculture at the household level, because South Africa has moved away whereby people are growing food in the gardens for them to eat. They are more money subsistent. It's easy to give them money and go to one of the big 4 retailers in South Africa. And that is where we are finding ourselves in that catch-22 situation. But let me not hog the time, Rashida. I can see you're burning to say something.
No, not at
back
all.
to you.
No, I'm actually really enjoying your feedback. It's wonderful to hear all of this. I mean, we also are aware that government is taking strides, and I mean, we've made huge progress in South Africa, even to try to address inequalities, and we have fantastic policies. But I think we all to be trying to see how can we improve the implementation side on the policies. And I don't know if you have any comments maybe on that particular question for me.
I do think we need what they call a bosberaad in South Africa, or the English is running away with me now. Where we need to come together, because as government we've realized we cannot do everything. I think we are more inclined to work towards creating an enabling environment for most of the implementation parts to actually get done. Because like you said, we have good policies in South Africa. Yes, we love writing, but when it comes to implementation, I think we are lacking a bit. And I do think that we want to take hands with civil society, as well as with the private sector, so that implementation can happen, because you need both of those role players to actually make sure that implementation happens. The other part is that we keep each other in check, that the one doesn't run away with the other one, or it's dominated by one. So having this triangular type of alignment and system, it would be very good, because we can keep each other in check and provide oversight over one another. As civil society and private sector have told us that your implementation is nowhere, or not nowhere, but it's lacking. And we know that we have to put more work around that. And I think if we can get the council off the ground, I think just getting all the relevant role players with learning institutions around the table there, where the deputy president can say, but guys, you are busy playing. Let's get down to work and get our hands dirty. I think we need that.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. I hope you don't mind if I ask you another question.
No problem. No
You know,
problem.
it's a fantastic opportunity to pick your brain, and you've got so much to share. Thank you for that. So just in terms of how we presented the research and how we've made the linkages between the different aspects within a system. So we've now framed it according to these 5 priority areas. Firstly, do you have any comments on the priority areas? You think that we are going in the right direction? And like, what's your thoughts on making all these linkages between so many different aspects within a food system? Does that make things easier, or what advice do you have for us basically on that, please?
Rashida, no, this is recorded. I wanted to say off the record, but me personally, what I've done, because I'm responsible for smallholder development, but I work in food security. So we're one of the core cogs of food security. I work in food security. So the way you framed it, the different nexuses, it makes a lot of sense. To the untrained eye, you won't understand it, that the black is the current situation and the green is where you want to move or potentially where you want to go. Let me do say, I might not acknowledge it in South Africa or in other platforms, but I've already printed those things out. We're already looking at how as policymakers we can actually use them. Yes, we're going to steal, with all due respect, we're going to steal some of those ideas, because I do like the way you put it as nexuses, because food security, it's not one thing. It's a very complex. So when you can break it down into energy water nexus, or an energy agriculture nexus, or in the way you have a governance, production, availability, access, all of those things, it becomes very important, because I think that is what my executive of my department is always asking me, is that, yes, we've produced at least 16 million tons of maize, white and yellow, this year. That's good enough. We know that we consume 11 million tons of maize in this country. That is for our own needs across the board, and then the rest goes into the animal value chain, and then we know we have a further 2 million that we can make money with. We know we export a lot of citrus. That's all good and well, but now what is the effects on water? As you've just shown, we are a water scarce country. We're extremely water scarce country. We are also, like the Indian colleague said, got to do with food safety, where you talk about labeling and all those issues. So the way you framed it, I genuinely appreciate it. I think it's welcome, because it gives us a different way of thinking. Yes, you're going to find resistance within government. We are good at defending our territories and our small silos, and we'll defend it to death. But I do think you've given us an opportunity to think the way you have framed it, to think outside of our little comfort zones where we can thrive, and think bigger than that, because that is also what the executives and our politicians are asking us. So what? You have all this information, so what? Bring us how best we can put this together. So I do think it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot. That's excellent. If I can go to the rest of the participants in the meeting, and I see my colleague Nafisa Sobrati. Her name is Charles Surgery on you. I'm not sure why, but it's Nafisa, and she's been instrumental actually in the systems work on SHEFS. She's been with us from the beginning of the project. So thanks a lot, Nafisa. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Rashida. So my question is to Roger. So basically, my query is, if you see how we've started the SHEFS project by co-designing with a multi-stakeholder approach with different type of stakeholders. So all throughout the project, an effort was made to acknowledge how the project is multidimensional, it has multiple scales, and the problem, it's very dynamic, it's co-evolving as we are trying to do the research, as we get into the different systems and subsystems, and also with respect to the context of South Africa, where there's a huge impact of history. So then in government, given that we now have a package of research, multidimensional, with capable of producing multiple impact, what do you think we need in order to move from from planning to strategic to vision and to transformation. So what is the next step? What is the higher level of intervention that we require, given what the consortium has achieved in South Africa? Thank you.
Can I go ahead and respond?
Please do.
Thanks. Yes, ma'am. Thanks for that question. I do think I have already had the opportunity to actually think about it, to say, okay, you have this, so what happens next? There's a couple of things in this process or in the system that needs to happen. So one, we can already say thank you to UKZN to be part of this consortium and having this foundation of literature that is at our disposal. The next part is that what I can do and what I will do is actually take it to the National Food and Nutrition Security Coordinating Committee. And as we are planning to get the council in place, led by our deputy president, because this needs to then form the basis so that when the deputy president asks, do you know what is your problems in terms of food and nutrition security, I can comfortably say, yes, we have a body of information, and here it is. But before we even can get there, let's get maybe an ad hoc session where we introduce all this information to the national coordinating structure before we even get to our DGs, which is the technical committee before that, to say that here's all this, here's all the information that we do have. UKZN has managed to do this all for us, and we are grateful. So how UKZN, then we need to sit down with UKZN and all the colleagues that's done all this research to say, okay, let's prioritize. Where do we start first? Is it health or is it agriculture? So we need to go through the process of prioritization and say, okay, this is what UKZN is saying, and then this is where the department is saying their problems are. How do we then bridge the gap? Because working with the National Food and Nutrition Security Coordinating Committee, it would be the best way where we can get maximum leverage and maximum coverage, because with that structure, I can call the relevant colleagues to do implementation and to support you to that. And where they don't want to come, I do have the whip of the deputy president, which is nice. And you get here or you don't. So letters can go through his office. Say, please join these colleagues and let them assist you in how to take it forward. Because believe you me, Rashida, once this is made known, the other universities are gonna come big and hard and fast. Your University of Pretoria, we know that they are big into this as well. I know that Dr. Chantal Witten has just moved to University of Free State, so they will also come. So we'll have to then start a whole platform where our universities actually leads us with research to say, this is where policy intervention needs to be, as well as implementation methodologies. So it's a process.
Yeah, we are absolutely open to working with any university. I mean, as SHEFS, I think we've got more than 79, is it? Well, we've got 79 individuals, but how many institutions do we have on here, Rosie? Like we work across institutions and basically with any organization that is wanting to improve the food system. So we are all for that. And thanks a lot for the very positive feedback. Malik, I'm not sure how much more time we have. I think we've extended the time allocated to us, but it's been a fantastic.
Rashida, just before you go on, can I say something?
Of course, please do.
I think this is a question not only to you, but to the whole consortium. I see food systems is coming out. It's the new buzzword. I think you also need to do some research. What is the difference between the food system and food security? Because in my small mind, it's difficult. I want to bring it. I want to pull it under this umbrella of food security, and I think. Going forward, maybe for me in my small corner with my counterparts, this food systems, we see it as it's a new buzzword. It's the new trend. and I'm not sure how long it's going to last, but I think some research or clear explanations and definitions and in its interrelationness would be very critical to us. But let me give it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think I'm going to put it to my colleagues as well, but as I understand it, food security is when you have access to nutritious and healthy food. It's not only available, but you have access to it, because nutritious food is available, but everyone doesn't have access to it. So it's about access to food and nutritious food. And then the food system touches on everything that has an impact on the delivery of food and everything that is impacted by the production of food. So I don't know if there's anyone that has a better response there from SHEFS to that question.
Yes, Rashida. So food security is an outcome of a food system, but it is not the only outcome of a food system.
Thanks, Nafisa. I think Dr. Suhas also might want to comment, and then we have a comment from Nanine in the chat box, which I will address. Dr. Wani, would you like to go?
Not really. I have any comments, but I do agree that definitely we need to have the partnerships to deliver the goods, whether they are in terms of SDG or environment protection or sustainable food systems. And as you know that FAO is promoting the food systems, and of course Save and Grow was their thing 3 years back, where basically they were highlighting saving the water and producing more, and also saving the food so that the water used for production can be efficiently used for food security reasons and so on and so forth. In that sense, I fully agree that definitely we need to work on the food systems, and food systems we need to expand the thing. As you know that in India, the pearl millet or bajra, jawar, which were poor man's food, have become now rich man's food or 5-star food because of the awareness. And 2023 is an international year of millets by the FAO, and we need to ensure that the less water consuming crops are promoted, not only for the farmers, but also for the consumers, because if there is a market, then there will be production also by the farmers.
Thank you, Dr. Wani. And Nanine, would you like to speak, or can I read your comment out? Please, it'd be nice if you could introduce yourself. And Nanine has a question for Roger.
Hi, can you hear me and see me? Okay, great. I can only see the presentation. So yeah, my name is Nanine. I am a medical doctor and also the managing director at the Physicians Association for Nutrition South Africa. So we do a lot of work at the nexus of health and environment and food choices. So how all of those come together, especially and really the foundation is in health. And the healthcare health professionals in our country. So my question was really about, you know, as NGOs that are working so hard within the space, and we are working on implementing projects in South Africa. How do we get involved with, you know, the projects that the National Nutrition and Food Security coordinating committee or council are planning to work on? How can we almost offer the services that we have and the resources that we have built up, and who can we speak to that is focusing on health specifically, because we don't really seem to find much support in that regard.
Thank you, Doc. Can I go ahead and respond? Please do. Okay. No, it's a pleasure to meet you, Doc. I do think it is, when I'm back at home, it's a process of where I introduce you into Department of Health. So we've got a direct linkage. Dr. Lynn Muheng, Rebone in Sia, she is so they do nutrition, and they're from Department of Health. So it is not like it's that process of where the National Food and Nutrition Coordinating Committee, and I actually directly link you to these colleagues, either through a MS Teams, Zoom meeting, or face-to-face, or just through an email, and really set up that linkage between you and them, and say, colleagues, these are people, these are, and we are very receptive, especially to our sectors. Agriculture, maybe not as much, but the health and the DSD colleagues, or social development, because they've brought in a lot of people. So that is possible, and it's just a linkage, just to make sure that you have that link. And that is, I think that is part of my work, is to create that linkage for you to get a foot into, especially when it comes to Department of Health for food security. So it can be done. It's a process. It's a simple meeting. It doesn't even need coffee. It doesn't even need you to fly somewhere. It via MS Teams, we'll set it up, and boom, we'll take it from there.
Great, that's very generous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rashida. I think that's all the questions and comments we have. So I suppose, can we move on to the UK? Thank you, Roger, for your thoughts and for linking us up with the departments.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you, Mr. Takeldo, and having your energy in the meeting as well. Thank you very much for that. We will definitely be talking to you again soon.
It's a pleasure. Sorry, Madam Chair, can I briefly be excused? Because I am at the CFS in Italy, and there's an issue that the other countries want to exploit Russia, and South Africa being part of BRICS partnership. We just want to be to our brothers in Russia to show them that we support them. We're not going to say anything. I'll stay online, but if I'm not talking, you can always, Rashida, you can always send me a WhatsApp or an email, and I'll definitely will respond. But I won't be as active because I just need to go back into the meeting.
Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Rosie, I suppose the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Malika. Rashida, if you can stop sharing your screen, I don't think I can share mine. That's great. Thank you very much. Okay. I hope everyone can see it now. Let me just get that working. There we go. So I am Rosie Green. I'm from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and I'm going to talk you through the SHEFS UK research that we've been working on over the last 5 years. And as with the other 2 countries, I will try and distill down what has been an awful lot of research work into a fairly digestible chunk for you all to have a look at. Unfortunately, our SHEFS UK discussion panelist has COVID, because that's the way the world is these days. So she is not going to be able to join us. So instead, we're going to have a slightly more broad discussion after this presentation. And Stephanie, who's one of our SHEFS team members from City University, has very kindly agreed to lead that. So I will start off by giving some policy context to the UK SHEFS work. And it was so interesting for me to hear the discussion just now about South Africa and its food and nutrition security strategy, because the UK has been going through this process for a while now, and I think it would be really interesting for us to learn about the experience of other countries and their food strategies as well. So to give a little bit of background on it, the UK has a national food strategy which began back in 2018 when an independent review of the food system was commissioned, and that was the first major review across the whole UK food system that's happened for 75 years. So it was quite a big deal. And the food strategy review engaged with actors across the food system. So it engaged with the food industry, with civil society organizations, with policymakers, and it also engaged with the public. So in terms of potential food policy changes, those were run past citizens of the UK to find out which policies might be more acceptable to people. And that review was published last year in 2021, and it came back with 18 recommendations for the government that included things like recommendations for dietary change, for land use change, and for regulation of the food industry. And then the government this year has published a response to that review, which was originally planned to be followed by a white paper on health disparities in the UK, but that second part has now been cancelled. So what we do have are some recommendations that have been responded to by the government, but not all of them at the moment. And the response has been very heavily focused on UK food security, which makes sense given the current climate with cost of living increases. So that's just really to give you some context of how the UK SHEFS work has developed, because the food strategy was announced in the very early stages of SHEFS. And so we developed our research alongside the food strategy so that we could be as policy relevant as possible in the research that we were doing. So our starting point with the UK research was really some particular problems as with the UK's current food system as we saw it. And the first one was a health problem. So we know that around 18% of disability adjusted life years lost in the UK are related to diet. Our diets are not making us healthy at the moment. We also need to change both diets and food production to meet the UK's net zero target, which is a legally binding target the UK is committed to by 2050. Changes to agricultural production methods will get us some of the way to that net zero target, but probably not all of the way there. So we will need dietary change as well. And then our third problem was that the UK is a big importer of food, and that could be impacting on our food security. So just to illustrate really all three of those points with this graph here, this is a graph of fruit and vegetable consumption in the UK and our target. So we're aiming for at least 5 portions a day or 400 grams. And you can see from the bar on the left that our average intake is just over half that at the moment. But when you look at the green segment of that bar, that's the amount of our fruit and vegetables that are currently UK produced, and it's way, way under. So that's just a little illustration of some of the problems that we have in the current food system. And another one is food prices and the types of food that tend to be cheap and discounted. So all of that brought together led us to one overarching research question, which is how can everyone in the UK access a healthier, more sustainable and affordable diet? And we've split that into 3 sub-questions. So what diets should we be aiming for? How can those diets be supplied? And what are the barriers that we need to overcome to be supplying those diets to people? So I will take each of those points now in turn and tell you a little bit about the SHEFS research that we've done to try and tackle those questions. So first of all, we know that the UK has dietary guidelines already. They come in the form of the Eat Well plate that you can see here, the Eat Well guide, sorry. But SHEFS research has found that unfortunately less than 0.1% of people in the UK are currently meeting all of those targets. So our diets are a very long way away from where we would want them to be. And mostly that's because they have too few whole grains, too few fruit and veg, too much red and processed meat, and also too much sugar and salt. So we did some research to find out what about the people in the UK who get closest to meeting those recommendations? We know that only 0.1% meet all of them, but what about the people that are meeting the most? And we discovered that the people that meet more recommendations of that Eat Well guide, they're 7% less likely to die early, so they are healthier in general. And also their diets emit around 30% less greenhouse gas emissions, and they use slightly less water. So in the graph on the right, that's the circled 2 bars. These are the people who have what we call intermediate to high level of meeting the dietary recommendations, and their diets are better for the environment and they are also healthier. However, only about 30% of people in the UK currently fall into that group. So what we ideally need to do is shift the population more towards the diets of that group. So that's the what diets should we be aiming for. Now on to how they could be supplied in theory, and this takes us on to the idea of imported versus homegrown food. And what we did for this piece of research was we looked at 4 different pathways to get fruit and vegetable consumption up to that 5 a day target that I showed you before. And we did that based on 4 different combinations and sources of fruit and vegetables. So in this little diagram, you can see that there's a sort of global to local axis. At the moment, we know that the UK is on much more the global side of it because we're importing more food. And then there's a fruit and veg versus veg only axis, which tells us sort of how we could make up that 5 a day in different ways. And we looked at the changes to health, the environment, and the cost of the diets that would result from those 4 pathways. And what we found was that this number 2 pathway, which we called veg all, because it's more towards eating veg than fruit, and it's more towards global sources rather than local, that was the best one for health, and it would increase life expectancy by about 8 months. It would also have the lowest greenhouse gas emissions, and it was also the cheapest of the 4 pathways, although they all cost more than current diets, which is a problem that I will come back to. The Veg UK pathway, this number 4 one here, was actually slightly better for water use because, as those of you who have visited the UK will know, we are quite a wet country a lot of the time, and therefore we use less water in growing our vegetables than some other countries where we are importing them from. And that pattern was almost as good for greenhouse gases and for health as well, but it was more expensive because currently our homegrown vegetables are on average more expensive than our imported ones. So there you can start to see there are some trade-offs here in where we're getting our fruit and vegetables from. Then the other 2 pathways where fruit and vegetables were increased by the same amount, they were similar for health, but they had higher greenhouse gases and they were more expensive because fruit tends to be more expensive than vegetables, and producing it creates more greenhouse gas emissions than producing vegetables. So that's a little bit about how those diets could be supplied. And then the UCL team from SHEFS went on to look at how, so if we did start to grow more vegetables in the UK and consequently reduce our meat intake because we are substituting some of the meat for vegetables, what would that do to UK land use, and what would it do to the habitats of our main pollinators, which are these are butterflies that you can see here. So that research found that converting grazing land for meat to horticulture for fruit and vegetables was largely not positive for the habitats for pollinators unless we converted some of the spare land that we would save by not producing so many animals on it to natural cover. And so then if you convert some of that spare land to natural covers, you do get a big increase in pollinator habitats. So there are some extra benefits to be achieved there. And that could also help mitigate some of the reduction in habitats that is going to be caused by climate change in the future. So then finally, what are the barriers to us being able to achieve these things? Well, what's suggested at the moment in the food strategy is what they're calling a 3-compartment model, where some land use is intensified, so more food is produced on it. Some land use is shared between natural cover and agriculture, and then some land is spared because of the intensification. Some land is spared to be rewilded, and that would make more land available for nature. But there's also a potential issue where there could be increased price disparities between high output and high quality foods. So this really means that foods grown under intensified land uses will be able to produce more, but they might be lower priced, but they might not necessarily be the high quality, healthy foods. And on the other side of the spectrum, foods produced very sustainably might be of higher quality, but they might also be of higher prices. And prices are absolutely crucial. And they also result from more costs across the supply chain and not just from production. So on the right, you can see this is some research that the SHEFS UK team did for the Food Foundation's Broken Plate report, which they produce every year, talking about how some of the problems with the UK food system. And it shows that for the bottom income quintile in the UK, about half of their disposable income would have to be spent on achieving a healthy diet. And that is absolutely huge. And with food insecurity on the rise in the UK at the moment, food prices are going to be a huge problem that we need to contend with. So that's one of our key barriers that we identified. Then just finally, I'll go through the policy implications of all this as we see it. We've got these 3 main insights, which I've really talked about, which are to do with meeting the dietary recommendations, growing more food in the UK and turning some of the grazing over to agriculture, and then the idea that there are price disparities that could be a problem. And our suggested recommendations really are to establish some strong governance mechanisms to ensure collaboration between departments, as the other countries have talked about as well, and the idea of this longevity of focus, that we can work on this for the long term and it not be a short-term issue. At the moment, we know the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs is leading on the food strategy, but there's a question over how much health is going to be the focus because of that. Then the second recommendation is to coordinate across government to facilitate the shift in diets that we really need. There are some positive things about current diets. People are reducing their meat consumption and they are increasing fruit and vegetable consumption. But unfortunately, that's mostly coming from climate vulnerable countries because our tastes have shifted to want fruit and vegetables all year round from whatever country they're being produced in. So that could be a problem for resilience to climate change. And then finally, we need relevant funding for diverse types of farming systems and manufacture. We have a proposed environmental land management scheme, which would pay farmers for environmental services rather than paying them for pure food production, as has been the case in the past. But there's a big question over whether that's going to be implemented, and if so, whether it's going to be able to achieve a sustainable food system. So I will leave you with those questions that we have thought it would be important to focus on. I just wanted to give a quick thank you shout out to the large SHEFS UK team who have done some fantastic work in this area. But perhaps I will put the questions back up if that's useful, and then I would like to ask Stephanie to please lead the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rosie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, it's really exciting to see all of the work that has been done and that's come out of the team. I'm wondering, and I have a few questions that I'd like to pose, but I'll encourage anybody who's listening to please either raise your hand or send in questions so we can get a good group discussion going. But I'm wondering if you, Rosie, could speak first to this this issue of dietary shifts. You've noted that some major dietary shifts would need to be a part of both improving health and meeting net zero goals and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Have you seen an interest in dietary shifts come through any of these policies that are being released, or any of the discussions that are taking place, especially in light of some of the developments that have happened in the past few weeks regarding the sugar tax and all of that? So if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it certainly has been a part of the conversation, and up till last year, when the food strategy independent review was released, I think it was quite clear that, you know, we can't do everything just by changing our production methods, and dietary shifts are necessary. There's been a lot of debate over what methods can be used to achieve those shifts. So the Committee on Climate Change in the UK has said that to meet net zero, we need to reduce meat and dairy consumption by about 20%. And that is slowly happening, actually, because people are changing their behaviour, but probably not quick enough to meet our targets. The food strategy review stopped short of recommending a meat tax because when they tested it with citizens, they found that it was really not acceptable to people. So they took that off the table straight away, which is interesting because a lot of other countries are considering meat taxes, but none have actually implemented one. But there were the sugar tax that we have in the UK is a reformulation tax. So it's designed to be targeted towards the industry rather than towards consumers, so that it encourages soft drinks manufacturers to reformulate their soft drinks to have less sugar in. And that has actually been quite a success as far as it's been measured. There is now talk of rolling it back. But previously there were considerations of potentially extending that type of tax to other foods. And then other options that were talked about were things like increasing investment in plant-based alternatives to meat and dairy, and encouraging reformulation of some packaged foods to decrease their meat content, and also reducing or restricting advertising of meat-based highly processed foods. So all of those are things that have been discussed. At the moment, it's really difficult to say what, if any, of those things might be implemented, because we've had a lot of changes in government recently. But I think it's clear from the evidence that we need some combination of those things to really make the changes that we need at the scale that we need them.
And the work on trade that the team has done has been really interesting. Can you speak to some of the relevance to the international trade deals that have been being negotiated post Brexit, and the UK's hunger for tropical fruits and fruits from other countries, if and how you think these considerations should be integrated into trade negotiations?
Thank you. Yes, it's a really interesting time for trade for the UK, I think. And I think it's very difficult for British farmers. Having spoken to some farmers, we're in a position where the UK has very high food standards and animal welfare standards at the moment. And there is a fear that by opening up some new trade routes, that those standards could be weakened, and that UK farmers would lose out because of that, because they would become less competitive. There is certainly, it seems to me, a move towards trying to make the UK more self-sufficient in food. And at the moment, what we're most self-sufficient in is meat and dairy, which is a little bit of a difficult situation when those are the foods we want to be encouraging people to eat less of. I do think that it would be advisable to protect the UK's reputation as a country where food and animal welfare standards are very high, and where potentially we could be exporting certain types of food for that reason, because there should be a market for that. But it doesn't seem like a particularly wise move to suddenly start increasing imports of cheaper and lower quality foods for that reason. Things seem to be evolving very quickly at the moment, and I do think we've got in terms of the importing of fruits and vegetables that you mentioned at the end there, we've got very used to having exactly the same fruits and vegetables all the year round, and that does mean that we are importing them from very vulnerable countries, and I think we need to consider whether that is the most sensible thing to be doing, or whether we could be producing some more of our own. And I think the SHEFS research has shown that there could be some multiple benefits of doing that. I can see that Richard has his hand up, so I think he'd probably like to come in at this point and talk about that as well.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, I was going to slightly shift to another topic, if that's okay. I had another question, and it's been fascinating discussion, and maybe I was thinking a bit more broadly than just the UK situation. It struck me. Okay, so I'm no policy wonk here, so sorry if this is a naive question, but it just is very striking across all the presentations that we've had, how much the issues are in part driven by compartmentalization, or siloing, I think was a term used as well, within government departments, which is, I suppose maybe is natural that people are pulling, departments are pulling in different directions. But is that just an insurmountable problem that we have to live with, or how is that being addressed in the policy world, or is there some research that needs to go on in terms of how that can be addressed? I don't know. It just, from my ill-informed perspective, it seems like a rather insurmountable problem, and yet a really big one that needs addressing. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts for the UK, or I think it's for South Africa and India as well.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting to hear from participants in India and South Africa on that question. I can maybe start by talking a little bit about the UK, and I'm also not a policy expert, but I completely agree with what you're saying, Richard. I think the food strategy in the UK has been an attempt to address some of those questions, because it was designed to cut across government departments, and it did involve participation from multiple departments. The level to which that's going to be maintained now in the government response is where things get really interesting. And there has been a government response from DEFRA, but I think that needs to be maintained across government departments. So I would be really interested to see what the plan is now for carrying that forward, and whether there will be a continuing cross-governmental response, because I think that's going to be essential. But yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to come in from India or South Africa to talk about their experiences of that.
Dr. Wani, if you want to come in, you can go for it.
Yeah, I think we need to understand that the policymakers look from the angle which suits them the best. And in this regard, we need to have sufficient evidences demonstrating that we will be contributing to their political agenda. For example, zero emissions by 2050. If we can have enough evidences to show to the high-level policymakers that definitely it can contribute to their agenda, then the policies become very, very convenient. As I was indicating in case of the pulses, for supporting the minimum support price for pigeon pea in India production, when the farmers have planted almost 2 times or 2.5 times than the normal acreage to the pigeon pea. And we know that there will be a glut of market for the pigeon pea in the coming season. We alerted the government very quickly, saying that this may happen and it will derail the whole emphasis what government was doing for self-sufficiency of pulses production in the country. The government quickly, within 1 month, the policy came out that we are supporting the price this for pigeon pea, and we assure that we will buy the pigeon pea from the farmers, whoever wants to sell it. And it saved the country basically from going down the spiral of pulses short supply, as compared to if there would have been a lack in the policy decision, then definitely 3 years farmers would not have touched the pigeon pea as such. So in brief, what I say that we need sufficient evidences to show to the policymakers that we are along with them on their agenda to whatever the commitment they have made to the public or at the international level, and that will support them, and that's where then the policy comes on very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. That's a really interesting perspective, and it talks to some of the work that we've been doing, that, and not just us, you know, lots of us around kind of win-win-win type scenarios, right? When you can identify one of these scenarios or some policy that is like, well, hang on, this is good for greenhouse gas, this is good for health, this is good for biodiversity, this is good, you know, those are the kind of gold nuggets that we need to be identifying, because then we can run with them. I don't know if there is a South Africa perspective on this.
Yeah, I just want to add, you know, when we started SHEFS, and as we're going through, we've done a lot of systems work, and we've hosted policy actor engagement sessions, and we've hosted crop systems management, crop systems mapping workshops and livestock. And whenever we have the different stakeholders in a room, and they start to see when we are mapping the system that whatever they're doing does have an influence on another department. And, you know, there are so many linkages within the food system. the Department of Water has an influence on food production because agriculture needs water, and natural resource management, managing rivers and natural resources have influences on biodiversity and ecosystem services, which are then crucial for food production. So when you get these different stakeholders within a room together and they finally start to see the linkages, I think that's where we can start to break those silos. And we definitely saw a lot of positive feedback from people who previously worked separately and now starting to see, the interlinkages. And I think it's only through engagement that we can start to break these silos. And definitely there's lots of opportunity for that in our research, and also just from the feedback we got from Mr. Takeldo that they are starting to now do this in government in South Africa. And we now see a gap for us to, come in and participate in that breaking of the silos and helping the departments to see the linkages between their mandates and what they are expected to provide. So yeah, very exciting space for us.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions on Rose's presentation or any of these other topics? I have my own question that I'm also interested to ask on the issue of food prices, as you raised. If there's been any discussion or research underway on how you shift to these more sustainable and healthy diets, but the impact that might have on prices, especially considering the cost of living crisis and energy, and how that fits into all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. I think that's really difficult at the moment in the current climate in the UK, because there is such a fear about the increased cost of living. And I think that's partly why the UK government has slightly backed off some of the measures that they were previously considering introducing to tackle the obesity crisis. But it's slightly circular, isn't it? Because if we don't tackle the obesity crisis, then there are fewer people who are able to work because of their ill health, because of their diets, and therefore that can also contribute to a cost of living crisis. So I do think it's something that still needs to be maintained as a focus. One of the things that we could consider, which doesn't involve making diets more expensive, which you can see was one of the problems when we looked at some of the dietary scenarios in our SHEFS work. One of the things that maybe we need to reconsider is the subsidies that are placed on farming, and that's when I came into talking about the environmental land management schemes, because it's a similar situation to the fossil fuel industry in a way, where with fossil fuels, we are still subsidizing production of things that are killing us. And also in the food industry, we are to some extent subsidizing production of the foods that are bad for our health. So I think maybe that's one way to initially approach those kinds of issues, is by thinking about, okay, well, how can we more sensibly subsidize food, since we're doing it already? How can we subsidize more the things that are good for our health and good for the environment, rather than actively subsidizing things that are not good for health?
Great, thank you. Okay, well, I think this has been a really rich discussion and time. Unless anybody else has any questions, maybe we can close out. I don't know, Malka or Rosie, if you have anything you want to close up with.
I do believe everyone's had their say and their questions. So thank you, everyone. I thank the panelists in particular for making time and joining us today for all the discussions. And I'll thank our presenters too. It's been lovely sharing thoughts across these 3 countries. I believe it's our first experience bringing all of this research together on the same day and bringing up questions like we just had about how do we actually get over this problem of siloing, for example, which is quite interesting too. So we have all your contact details, all the participants. I thank you all too for staying on with us through the entire couple hours. And with this, I believe we can close, but for further details, we're coming out with our reports quite soon, perhaps by the end of this year. So all the information that we presented today will be made available in a slightly longer format that is ready for you to read and interpret. So we will be in touch. Yes, and thank you all for your time.
And thank you, Malika, for chairing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Really good, rich discussion. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Nice.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.